Funding for this episode comes from a grant from the Rias Berlin Commission, connecting journalists across Germany and the U.S. since 1992.
Welcome to More to Know, a podcast to explore beyond the headlines. In every episode, we'll take a look at a topic and bring together different voices on the subject who are experts or directly involved. We'll talk about what's in the news, science, technology, some sports, and just things that have more to know. We'll bring you a new episode every 2 weeks, so make sure to like and subscribe. I'm your host, Christopher Conover. In this episode, we look at how U.S. tariffs affect this and other countries, specifically in the auto industry. Just hours after being sworn in a year ago, President Donald Trump spoke at a rally at the Capital One Arena in Washington, D.C., and brought up one of his favorite words.
I always say tariffs is the most beautiful word to me in the dictionary. Then I was reprimanded by the fake news. They said, what about love, religion, and God? I said, I agree. Let's put God number one. Let's put religion number two. Love, I don't know. We got to put that number three, I guess, right? And then it's tariff. Because tariffs are going to make us rich as hell. It's going to bring our country's businesses back that left us.
And true to his word, the president began threatening tariffs on countries around the globe unless trade deals were worked out. A number of deals were struck, and the threatened tariff amounts were either reduced or never went into effect. But the president has also used tariffs in foreign policy. A day before his one-year anniversary in office, President Trump posted on Truth Social that starting in February, he was going to put an additional 10% tariff on a number of European allies who opposed his plans for Greenland. A few days later, he posted again on Truth Social that a framework of a deal over Greenland was reached with NATO and he would not be imposing the tariffs. But if you're a foreign company which sells in the U.S., how do you deal with the changing threats of tariffs on goods? Those on-again, off-again, on-again, off-again tariffs and threats of tariffs are what German car makers have been dealing with. But they're not the only headwinds, according to Simon Schutz, the head of communications for the German Association of the Car Industry.
So you always have to see or look at it from the bigger picture. We're in the biggest transformation, going from the fossil fuel to electric fuel to the electric engine. We are also facing a backlash of protectionism all over the world. It's not only the US, it's China as well, it's other regions of the world who are going into this direction. And especially the German car industry is a very export-oriented industry. Then we had, in the last year, since I'm working here, we just had crises happening. You know, it started with the COVID and everything concerning the supply chain. Then we had the whole chips thing that is happening again all over. Then we had the war of Russia going into Ukraine and the energy crisis. So a lot of the things that used to be stable factors have changed. And now, on top of all of that, we have the tariffs from the US. So looking at that, you always have to see two things. There are some of our companies who are already active in the US and those who export a lot to the US. So, of course, it hits them differently. Those who already have their locations in the US, for example, BMW, they have their biggest plant worldwide in the US. They are, of course, differently influenced than those companies who export all of their cars or also parts to the US. So I think, of course, it is a big challenge. On the same page, I think our companies have shown in the past that we're really good in adapting. But the major problem behind all of this is, I think, the insecurity. What's coming next? Is this going to be like this for a while, or is there coming something on top of it? And those are all factors that are very important when it comes to investments. So this is what we have to deal with now.
For German car makers, the U.S. is an important market, which is why BMW, Audi, Mercedes, and Volkswagen all have manufacturing facilities in the country. But Schutz says the decision to build a facility and to construct it takes time.
investment decisions are not made from one day to another. There is a lot of planning, there's a lot of strategy behind it. And of course, everything that is adding up on insecurity is not something that is helpful for investment planning. At the same time, I think we have a tendency, not only when it comes to the car industry, but in general, that some industries are going more and more to a local for local approach. I mean, as we are doing a lot of production, for example, in China for China, we also do some production in the US for the US market. Of course, it's not something that we would say is ideal, but it's probably the way to go, because you always need to make the best out of the situation. I do believe that some of the companies will also do further investments in the US, because in general, I mean, next to this whole thing that we are facing with the tariffs, I think when it comes to competitiveness and the location side in general, that the US market has some factors where it's way more attractive than Europe, because Europe is facing a lot of challenges when it comes to energy prices, when it comes to bureaucracy, to taxes and all of that. So other regions in the world are kind of rather pulling the companies to come over and trying to be as attractive as possible. That's also why we are pushing a lot in Germany as well as in Brussels for politics to be more industry friendly, so we keep those very important industries also in our country and on our continent.
And for Germany, the car industry is key.
I mean, whenever I travel, when you say you're from Germany, people say, oh, and they name all the German car brands they know, though that's still something that goes, is strongly connected with Germany. And a lot of regions in Germany are totally built on a strong automotive industry with all the suppliers, and with the suppliers come other jobs. So it's the same here. A lot of regions are depending on the automotive industry.
But despite all of that, Schutz says he understands that the U.S. wants to make sure its car industry is strong.
But when you look at it, if you keep your own industry out of competition, I think that is the worst you can do when it comes to pushing innovation and pushing competitiveness. Because if you are not competing anymore with others or get advantages, that doesn't really fuel the energy of working even harder to get to better results. So I think in the end, there's not really a winner in this game. And I think another thing is that no matter in what market you want to be successful, whether it's China, whether it's the US, whether it's Europe, you need to learn that every customer in every country or every region has different preferences. In China, people think it is normal and they want a karaoke machine in the car. That's not really the case in Germany yet. Maybe it will be. Maybe it will be in the US. But if you want to be successful on that market, you got to adapt. You got to have a karaoke machine in the car. So, and I think it's the same with everything else. So I think if the US cars want to be more successful on the German or on the European market, you got to adapt to whatever the customer here is demanding. And that's different from the US.
That was Simon Schutz, the head of communication for the German Association of the Car Industry. We spoke with him in Berlin in December. So that's the perspective of the foreign car maker. But what about in the U.S.? We'll take a look at the issue from the other side of the Atlantic after this break. Stay with us, and remember to like and subscribe. Welcome back to More to Know. I'm Christopher Conover. On this episode, we're looking at tariffs and the auto industry. We've heard the perspective of German car makers, so now we turn to the United States. What has the uncertainty around tariffs meant for consumers and the auto industry in this country? For that, we turn to Peter Nagel. He's an automotive economist with S&P Global Mobility.
Well, I think it's made planning a lot more difficult. The whipsaw has probably been harder to deal with than the fact that, tariffs go up by a little or down by a little. It's whether or not they're going to be there in the first place, whether or not they're going to be long term or eventually relaxed. I think as an industry, automakers, OEMs, national sales companies, they like certainty and clarity, and more so than anything, long-term certainty. And it's just been making planning harder than it needs to be here. And I think you see that most clearly reflected in the fact that a lot of the pre-existing inventory, when we look at, say, the start of the year versus how we finish the year, inventories just haven't been replenished. Build schedules were slightly lighter over the summer months than they would have been, and I think automakers are just, maybe planning for a lot leaner situation here because they don't want to boost inventories, they don't want to boost production if tariffs are eventually going to be ratcheted down, or regulations are going to be changed. We've just been living more with our inventories here than anything else, and haven't seen those stocks replenished, which from a consumer standpoint, inventories and incentives are married hand in hand, and we've seen incentives being ratcheted back over the course of the year, which hasn't really improved affordability too dramatically over the last several months here. And our expectation is, again, that affordability is very much going to be a pressure point in 2026 as well.
A quick terminology explanation. When Nagel mentions OEMs, those are original equipment manufacturers, which refers to parts made by the same company that makes your vehicle. He says that tariffs don't just hit the manufacture of foreign vehicles sold in the U.S.
From a domestic manufacturer standpoint, we take the best-selling vehicle in the U.S., the Ford F-150. We look at engines from Canada. We look at frames coming from Mexico. Although USMCA compliant goods are still allowed duty-free access, some of the smaller components might not meet those critical thresholds and are going to see the cost of assembly and manufacturing go up. Conversely, if your competitors raising costs that are raising prices, automakers have a decision to make, right? Do we try and raise our prices in sympathy with those to eke out a little bit more margin, or do we maintain our costs or even lower them to go for market share? And even within, say, an existing nameplates portfolio, right? Do we produce more of our top trim, top spec product? Do we start to cut some of the production on our entry level product, and so we can make a little bit more margin that way that might not be as impacted?
Part of that math for car makers on what to offer to consumers is based on what consumers are willing to and can buy.
What has been resilient has been more luxury. Obviously, those consumers can afford larger payments, higher interest rates, have less concern over, say, the short-term economic outlook than, say, your entry-level buyer. But I would say it's really been across the board here. If we look at where the market has gravitated towards, it's really been hollowed out on both ends, both from a product and from a consumer standpoint. So most consumers now in the U.S. marketplace, from a household level, are households earning more than $100,000. Most vehicles now are transacting well above that $40,000 price point is the average transaction price. So the number of products that say start below $30,000, there's maybe only a dozen and a half products that really start at those really what would be considered entry level price points, versus, say, the number of products that sell above $80,000 has only increased over the last several years here.
Just as we were wrapping up this episode, President Trump went on Truth Social again and posted that if Canada makes a trade deal with China, something that the Canadian government is in talks about doing, the U.S. will level a 100% tariff on all goods coming into the country from Canada. That announcement comes as the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, the signatories of the USMCA, prepare for a scheduled joint review on July 1st. Even before the 100% tariff threat, Nagel says one of the biggest issues for the auto industry going forward is the USMCA and the uncertainty around its future.
That's going to have a big impact on, the not only the, say, 20-25% of the market that's imported from Canada and Mexico, but also from a parts standpoint, about 50-55% of vehicles sold in the U.S. are made in the U.S. But almost everything has components made in Canada and Mexico, and so there's been a concerted effort to really boost U.S. production, say, at the expense of Canada and Mexico to offset some of that uncertainty around USMCA.
That was Peter Nagel, an automotive economist with S&P Global Mobility. To put all of this in context, we looked at data from the U.S. Federal Reserve Bank. Total car sales in December 2025 were about the same as they were a year before, and sales in the U.S. have steadily increased since the extreme lows at the start of the pandemic in the spring of 2020. Federal Reserve data also show that production of domestic vehicles has steadily dropped since the mid-1990s. And that's it for this episode of More to Know. Join us next time when we go back to the headlines in the U.S. to talk about data centers. What are they? Why do some people not like them? What can they do for us? And what is their future? Coming up in the not-too-distant future, we'll also look at a beverage allegedly favored by Benjamin Franklin, who may or may not have said something along the lines of, "Beer is proof God loves us." So make sure to like and subscribe so you never miss an episode. TJ Spiker produced this episode, and our music is by Enter the Haggis. I'm Christopher Conover. Thanks for joining us.
Funding for this episode comes from a grant from the Rios Berlin Commission, connecting journalists across Germany and the U.S. since 1992.